Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Before we begin, please hit that like button if you would, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. It helps so much. You can also join my Patreon. We are in the midst of a big fundraiser, and I will talk about that at the end of the video. Almost everything we do in life now can be done online. We can order food online. We can control the lights in our houses, the temperature, the garage doors, the cameras, all of that can be done. We shop online. Hell, we order up sex online. Even people who don't use the internet for everything I've just mentioned probably use it for one thing, and that's to sell or buy items at a discount. People I know that don't really use social media a lot still tend to use like Marketplace and things like that. It's become part of our lives, buying and selling online. It's why our malls have become ghost towns. It's why so many retail businesses have closed or are struggling. We like to buy things and we like to sell things online. But there are dangers in doing so. Today's story is an example of how a man lost his life selling something online, but what it uncovered was much more than just his murder. It's not the first story of its kind, and sadly it won't be the last. This is the story of the discovery of a serial killer and his accomplice. The story of the murders of Tim Bosma, of Laura Babcock, and of Wayne Millard. Today we are talking about a deadly duo. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. This is 32-year-old Tim Bosma. He was a contractor and a family man. He liked to sing along to the radio and he loved to be outside. He also loved his pickup, but he felt like he was dumping too much money into it and he knew it was time to get rid of it. He placed this ad online to sell his Dodge Ram 3500 pickup, and on May 6th, he got a call from a man saying he would like to take the truck for a test drive. When the man appeared for the appointment, he was late and he wasn't alone. Two men showed up at about 9:30 that evening and they were on foot, which for me would be a huge red flag. Tim asked his wife, Charlene, if he should go with these two men so late at night. And Charlene said, well, I think you should because we want the truck to come back. We both have to get to work in the morning. Her worst case scenario was that the truck would get stolen. So Tim Bosma left his home in Ancaster, Ontario, with the two men that showed up together to look at the truck. And Tim never came home. The next day, May 7th, Hamilton police released a statement saying that Tim Bosma was officially missing. After he didn't come home that night, his wife Charlene alerted the police and informed them that Tim left their home to go and test drive this truck he was trying to sell. Immediately, people in the area gathered and began to go to work. Everyone in that part of the world knew Tim and they knew the Bosma family. They called themselves Tim's Army, and they spent the next week plastering Tim's face all over Ancaster. They made bumper stickers, they made missing posters, and they went out in search teams over and over looking for Tim. Charlene appeared on television, and I remember the press conference so well. She stood in front of the microphone and said, "It was just a truck. It was just a truck." Those words hit me really hard, and I know they hit a lot of other people really hard. People talked about her vulnerability at that press conference, and it was like we all kind of had this collective moment where we realized this was just a really nice young man who was trying to sell his truck online, and some random psychos showed up to steal it from him, and it looked like he was murdered for his truck. People were sick about it. They were upset and they were angry. They looked and they looked, but they could not find Tim. Now, we're going to come back to Tim's story towards the end of the episode. But first, we have to go back in time. I need to introduce you to the villain in this story and his accomplice. And you need to know what happened before Tim Bosma disappeared. This man is Dellen Millard. He was born into a family that had a long history in the world of aviation. At only 14 years old, Dellen Millard set a world record for being the youngest person at the time to take a solo flight in a helicopter and a plane on the same day. He was on the news, he was in magazines, people knew who he was, even as a teenager. But by the time Dellen was 20, the shine was off the apple. Dellen had dropped out of college, he was drinking heavily, and he was doing drugs. A lot of drugs, and a lot of hard drugs. He was out partying every night, and he had completely wasted the opportunities that lay at his feet when he was younger. A friend of his later said that Dellen had a God complex. He thought he was untouchable. He'd had some brushes with the law, but he was always able to get out of any kind of trouble that he got in. And let me tell you, I mean, a lot of you know this, that is not a good thing. Dellen then expanded his criminal enterprise to include wild parties where he'd network with other drug dealers. He started bringing women to his family's aircraft hangar, and he'd shoot pornographic photos of them. He gathered a little group of guys that admired him, and they started doing these burglaries together. They thought of themselves as kind of a little gang. I don't mean this to be offensive. It's actually a compliment. Canadians that think they're hard, it's kind of cute. These guys look like a group of middle schoolers. Gangs here in the States, this is not what gang members look like here in the States. This is not the vibe. Canadian gang members always look like what gang members would look like in a Saturday Night Live skit. We're very different in that way. And I don't mean to say that I think Dellen Millard is cute, because I'll get into that in a minute. The guy is gross. But I mean, like, everyone's just so baby-faced and fresh-looking up there in Canada. Down here, we got 12-year-olds that are terrifying. So Dellen's little group of cronies includes this man, Mark Smich, who liked to make short horror films. And he also thought he was going to be a gangster rapper. There's a video of Mark saying a rap. This is how old and white I am. I said saying a rap. But his rap goes like this. Blues. This is so embarrassing. I don't even want to say it. His rap goes, blues clues, blues lose. Talk to the cops. You're a snitch and you die, bitch. Like, that was his rap. As a 53-year-old white woman who actually likes rap music, I'm so embarrassed for him. I gotta get rid of my giggles, because this is not a fun story. I just think these two guys are so ridiculous. Dellen and Mark spent a lot of time at the Millard family air hangar at the airport, where Dellen would do things like buy an old car just to destroy it with a sledgehammer while Mark took video. Dellen bought a rocket launcher. He smashed cars up with the forklift that was at the hangar. Again, kind of like a middle school kid would do if he had access to destructive toys. Now let's talk just a little bit about Dellen Millard. He was just, he's just a douchebag. He's one of those kinds of guys that real men wouldn't want to be around. Does that make sense? He's like a dorky rich kid whose dad has money, and he's been handed everything his whole life. And so people are drawn to him for that reason. But like, he doesn't get the cool girls. He doesn't hang out with the cool guys. The cool guys think he's dorky. But he has this really high opinion of himself because he has this little gang of dorks. Guys like Dellen Millard in Hicksville, Utah here, these are the kinds of guys who they're known to get their asses kicked a lot here. A lot of people, they will move to St. George from like California or somewhere, and they think St. George looks like a big town, but it's really not. It's still got a very small town mentality. And they've got big mouths. They shoot their mouths off. You know, they come in driving nice cars. They sell their houses in California, and they make like $3 million on their house in California that's a shack. So they come here and they can buy a mansion for what they sold their house in California. We're getting a lot of that here. And these kinds of guys come to town and they'll like go to the bars, and then you end up like reading in the paper that they got like their asses kicked. And when I think about Dellen Millard, I think about that happening to him if he showed up here acting the way he acted. Dellen also thought of himself as a real ladies' man. I think this absolutely nauseating photo of him in a fedora is about all you need to see. Now, I mean, look, there was a phase for fedoras. I get it. I was around during that time. Sorry, Jace. I'm sorry. You know how much I love you. And I actually did like that hat on him at the time, but I would divorce him if he tried to wear it now. But Dellen very much strikes me as a fedora guy. So Dellen started dating a very young, naive girl named Laura, and now we need to talk about her. Laura Babcock grew up in a middle-class family. Here we would call her the all-American girl, but she was Canadian. She took music lessons and participated in school events, and she was very well liked by everyone who knew her. She was outgoing and vivacious. She had a beautiful smile, and she dreamed of becoming an actress. Laura had big plans for the future until they all came to a screeching halt. One night, Laura went out and met Dellen Millard at a Toronto bar. They hit it off and they began talking, and they had a relationship that lasted about a month. Laura was a bit infatuated with Dellen and his background as a teenage pilot who had been in the news, and she was also a little enamored of his wealth and his family legacy. Their fling affair lasted a few weeks and then it ended, but Laura and Dellen remained friends, and from time to time they'd go and meet for drinks. So Laura had moved on and she was dating this man, Sean Lerner, who is the exact opposite of Dellen Millard. He was going places, he's kind, responsible. He is the type of guy you would want your daughter to date. But from time to time, Laura was kind of drawn back to Dellen. Sean was really good to Laura. He even threw her a 22nd birthday party after they broke up. They stayed close. When he threw her this party, he invited Dellen Millard because he knew that Dellen and Laura were still friends. Well, Dellen brings with him this woman named Christina Nudga, and Dellen had kind of been dating her a little bit, I guess. As time went on, after this birthday party, Laura and Christina grew to really dislike each other. A year went by, and on Laura's 23rd birthday, a year later after she met Christina, Christina sent Laura this text that said, "Happy birthday, a year ago I slept with Dellen for the first time." Laura replied, "That's fine, I slept with him a few weeks ago." Ladies, you are literally fighting over a turd here. A turd sandwich. I will never understand it. I won't. But anyway, the point is Laura and Dellen were still hooking up, even though he had this girlfriend, Christina. After Laura's relationship with Sean Lerner ended, Laura's life spiraled out of control. She started working as an escort. Sometimes she was homeless. She had gone from this all-American, all-Canadian good girl to this harder looking sex worker. She went to the hospital about a dozen times in 8 months, complaining of depression and anxiety, and she was seeking medication to help with those things. The doctors later on would go on to say that they thought she was drug seeking. Laura had fallen into a really, really dark place. Her feud with Christina Nudga continued as well. For whatever reason, these two young women were fighting over Dellen, the douche canoe, and each time Laura told Christina that Dellen was cheating on her with Laura, it caused a huge problem for Dellen, and he wasn't happy about it. He wanted to sleep with Laura when he wanted to, but he didn't want her to talk to his girlfriend about it. Dellen sends a text to Laura telling her, "You are harmful to me, don't contact me." Then he sends this text to Christina telling her, "I'm going to hurt Laura and remove her from our lives." So Christina is also a real stand-up person there, that she would let a man talk about hurting another woman. By the spring of 2012, Laura Babcock was homeless and sleeping on friends' couches. Often her old boyfriend Sean would let her stay at his place. He'd feed her and make sure she was safe, but he didn't want to get back with Laura, and she knew it. Her life had really become a mess. In June of 2012, Laura and Dellen were texting again. In fact, over 100 text messages in a week. So even though Dellen told Laura to stay away, he was texting her just as much as she was texting him. Neither one of them could seem to stay away from the other person. And that was even with Christina in the picture. That meant, Laura's life is a mess. Dellen is psychotic. He's got this girlfriend who's mad about it. And there was only one way this was going to end badly. Laura Babcock and Dellen Millard meet at Toronto's Kipling subway station. From there, they travel here to Dellen's house. At around 7 p.m. that evening, Laura checks her voicemail, and that is the last time her phone is ever used. After that, Laura Babcock vanishes. She is never seen again. Incredibly, the police do not even question Dellen Millard. They know she was with him. They know about this feud. They know she was last seen with Dellen at his house. But for various reasons, depending on who you ask, Dellen is not questioned. I find that to be insane. Sean, Laura's ex-boyfriend, goes to the police over and over, and he's told Laura is high risk, she's a sex worker, she has mental health problems, she'll turn up. The cops tell Sean, these types of girls always go missing for a while and then they turn up. Laura Babcock was simply not a priority for the police. Sean is not taking no for an answer. He becomes the private investigator on Laura's case. He gets her phone records. He starts calling all the people she spoke with on her last day that the phone was used. And he sees that the last person Laura ever spoke with was Dellen Millard. Sean starts to look into Dellen Millard because the police won't. He finds out that Dellen told the mechanic at his family's airport hangar to build him an incinerator out of barrels. So they build this incinerator out of barrels and it doesn't work. So what does Dellen do? He orders an industrial incinerator and has it delivered. Then, as Sean continues to dig into who Dellen is, he finds out that on July 2nd, the day before Laura disappeared, Dellen bought this gun from this gun dealer. So now we know he's bought a gun and he's bought an incinerator days before Laura disappeared. At some point in the relationship, Sean had given Laura an iPad and he still had the location services to that iPad turned on. 2 days after Laura vanishes, Sean checks the location services app and he sees that the iPad is connected to a computer at the Millard airport hangar, and the name of the iPad has been changed from Laura's iPad to Mark's iPad. Mark Smich. Mark then writes another rap on that iPad about killing Laura. We will find out later on that the industrial incinerator is delivered on July 5th. The day before that, Dellen takes this photo of a long blue tarp laid out on the dirt and rolled up with Dellen's dog sitting by it. Laura Babcock is in that tarp. So Dellen gets this incinerator delivered and it takes him a couple of weeks to get it working properly. And then on July 23rd, Dellen sends this text to Mark Smich, his little accomplice, and it says, "Barbecue has run its warm-up. It's ready for meat." I hope Dellen Millard is ready for some meat in prison. I really, truly do. Dellen then snaps this photo of Mark holding an incinerator rake, and then he films these ashes flying into the air as the incinerator burns Laura's body. The police do absolutely nothing to find Laura. The employees at Millard Air are now fully aware that Dellen, who they call Dell, is running a criminal enterprise out of his father's airport hangar. There's all these cars and jet skis and toys in the hangar, and Dellen's father, whose name is Wayne Millard, is ready to cut Dellen off completely. He's done with his son. He knows his son has completely thrown away his life, and he's not going to sit by and watch his son destroy the business that his own father, Dellen's grandfather, started. Tensions rise between Dellen and his father, and then, all of a sudden, Dellen's problems are suddenly over forever. "71-year-old Wayne Millard has just begun construction on the largest hangar at the Waterloo International Airport, where he had plans to relocate his aircraft maintenance business to. His company was growing and expanding, and Wayne was excited about this move. He was also happy to have a new space, a space that he was not going to allow his son Dellen to take over. Dellen had basically taken over the old spot, and Wayne was not going to let this happen at the new spot. In the midst of this construction project, Dellen Millard walked into his father's Etobicoke house and found his father dead. There was blood all over the scene, and Wayne had died from a gunshot to the head. He was lying on his right side on his bed. Now, we don't have time for the actual freak out that I would like to have over this, but the coroner, who found the gun stuffed into a Lululemon bag wedged down between the bed and the nightstand, ruled the death a suicide. What? Where am I right now? What's happening? They somehow come to this conclusion that Wayne killed himself and then someone moved the gun. I have never in my life been so disappointed in Canada. You're supposed to be the good guys. You're supposed to be more advanced. We've got cops that won't look into the disappearance of a young woman and a coroner that rules a death as suicide when the gun is put away. Are y'all okay up there? There is very little investigation done into Wayne's death, even though he was in the middle of this massive company expansion and things were going really well with him. The police were just like, oh, killed himself, and then the gun floated its way into a Lululemon bag and put itself away. Case closed. It really is unbelievable. I could see this happening in some bigger cities here in America, but to know that this happened in Canada, it just surprises me. Maybe I am delusional. Maybe I have too high an opinion of the Canadian police. The police bring Dellen in for questioning, and I want to play you a little bit of that interview so you can get a look at this guy in action. You know, I always like to give you a little taste of the killer so you can see their mannerisms and hear their voice.
Okay, Dellen. We're here with respect to an incident that actually happened yesterday, Thursday, November 29th, 2012, at, I believe, your home at 5 Maple Gate. Yes. In Etobicoke. And what I'd like you to do is just start from the beginning as to what happened and that brought the police into this incident.
I don't know what happened yesterday, but today I got back to the house sometime between 6 and 6:30. I've been working at our family business in Waterloo. I came in through the side door. That's the door most everybody uses in the house. And I opened up the next door, which leads to the cat area of the house. It's the door from the kitchen to the hallway. And then my dog Pedo was waiting for me there. And I walked down the hallway, and I walked to my room, and I picked a sweater out of the closet. It had been a cold day. And then I was on my way back to the kitchen to make a snack, and I noticed that my father seemed to still be asleep in bed, which was odd because it was late in the afternoon, and something didn't really seem right about the way he was laying. He was laying very stilly. And then I walked into the room, and I saw blood on the pillow. And for a moment I had to leave the room. I actually went back to my room, and I got out my phone, and I walked back into my dad's room, and I called my mother, and I told her what I was seeing. I literally said, I'm standing in my dad's room, and there's blood all over his pillow, and he's dead.
Dellen Millard acts pretty emotionless over the death of his father, and the police take note of that. But Wayne is buried, and Dellen continues his criminal ways, and Laura is still missing, and no one's looking for her. But then Tim Bosma vanishes, and Tim's army is making a lot of noise. It's interesting, isn't it? Laura was a sex worker with no one but an ex-boyfriend to look for her. Tim is a well-known father who has a literal army of friends looking for him. That should not matter to the police in any part of the world. The police aren't supposed to work based on how much peer pressure they're under. The police job description doesn't include only work cases where a lot of people care about the victim. Laura was in a big city. Tim was in the country. That should not matter. Big cities have a lot more crime, but they also have a lot more cops. Being in a big city shouldn't mean the cops aren't going to work your case if something happens to you. These issues matter, and we must talk about them. You always see, like on Dateline or 48 Hours, that one cop that gets really upset that a case isn't getting worked, and so they take it on as a personal mission and end up solving it. That's great, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. With Tim vanished, the cops are feeling the pressure, and they are working Tim Bosma's disappearance very diligently. Then they get an anonymous tip. Someone calls the police and tells them that a man came into their dealership, their car dealership, to test drive a Dodge Ram 3500, and he had to fill out the paperwork. He specifically wanted a Dodge Ram 3500, which was Tim's truck. When the guy fills out the paperwork to take the test drive, his name? Dellen Millard. The tipster also said that the man had a little tattoo on his wrist that said ambition. What a dainty, sweet little tattoo on this dainty little douchebag of a man. Oh my gosh. So the police put Dellen Millard under surveillance and they look into his background, and soon they realize this guy has ties to some missing people and some deaths. They get an arrest warrant and Dellen is arrested. When he's placed into custody, he has Tim Bosma's keys in his pocket. These keys right here. The police raided Dellen's airport hangar and his mother's house. When they went to Tim's mom's house, they found Tim Bosma's truck in a trailer. They also found a shell casing in that truck. They put the truck under a luminol light and it glowed. Everywhere you see bright blue, those are spots where someone had attempted to clean blood off of this truck. The police pulled the surveillance images from around the airport hangar. Here you see two trucks pulling into the hangar. One of those trucks is being driven by Mark Smich, and the other is Tim's truck being driven by Dellen. I guess Dellen had decided that he wanted to buy this Dodge Ram 3500 to be able to pull trailers and to be able to move the incinerator around. The cops have kind of stated they think that Dellen and Mark were just going to use this truck. They didn't realize how big the reaction would be to Tim's disappearance, and so then they hid it in the trailer at Dellen's mom's house. On the surveillance from the plane hangar, they can see Mark and Dellen walking around in the airport hangar. Before that, they see Tim's truck being driven in. And then on the surveillance footage, they see that Tim's truck, along with something that's being towed behind it, has been pulled a little ways away from the airport hangar. The surveillance footage is obviously poor quality and it's in black and white, but the cops see that whatever's behind the truck on the trailer is glowing. It starts to glow and it glows all night. What was the piece of equipment and why was it glowing hot all night? Well, of course we know it was the incinerator with Tim's body inside. The police are starting to piece this together, but they do not find the incinerator at the airport hangar. Dellen Millard had a large piece of rural property in his family, and the police decided to search it. As they did, they crossed paths with a man out there riding a four-wheeler. And they stopped him and they asked him if he'd seen anything strange while he was out riding around. And the man said yes, he had. The police then followed this ATV rider to a clearing in the trees where they saw this. Dellen Millard's incinerator on a trailer just left in the woods. The police take the incinerator into custody and CSI teams are brought in to examine it. Inside the incinerator, they find pieces of bone that belonged to Tim Bosma. Dellen Millard and Mark Smich were then charged with first-degree murder. When this hit the news, the police in Toronto realized, oh, shit, this guy is linked to a missing girl that we have done absolutely nothing about. So at that point, they figure out, maybe we should do our jobs and start working this case. The police also reopen Wayne's supposed suicide and begin re-examining the evidence there. Just days later, Dellen Millard was charged with the murders of Laura Babcock and his own father. The trial dates were set, but then the legal wrangling began. The Bosma family was forced to go in and out of the courthouse month after month, while Dellen's attorneys fought to push the trial back at every turn. But then, 3 years later, after Tim Bosma disappeared, the jury handed down its verdict. On June 17, 2016, Dellen Millard and Mark Smich were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no parole for 25 years for the murder of Tim Bosma. Dellen was convicted of the murder of Laura Babcock in December of 2017 and was sentenced to life in prison a second time. On September 24, 2018, Dellen Millard was found guilty of murdering his father. A few months later, in December, he was sentenced to life in prison for the third time. In 2021, while in prison, Dellen got into a fight and he held an inmate down while another inmate stabbed him. That tracks. Dellen is definitely the guy holding another guy down to make him helpless. The man that was stabbed survived the attack and Dellen was charged. Then they had to drop the charges for lack of evidence. You don't have cameras in prison up there? In 2022, Canada decided that giving people consecutive life prison terms was unconstitutional. And so now Dellen and Mark are eligible for parole after 25 years. That is 2043, my friends. They'll both probably still be alive. Canada, you've just really let me down on this one. I'm usually singing your praises, but you've screwed the pooch on this one. Later, we find out that in 2014, Sean Lerner, Laura's ex-boyfriend, had written an open letter to the police in which he accused the Toronto Police Department of negligence, of apathy, and failure to do their job. He stated that they didn't care about Laura because she was a sex worker, and despite the evidence Sean provided them, evidence that Dellen Millard was involved in her death, the police had done nothing for Laura. Sean openly chastised the police and stated that had they done their jobs and looked into Laura's disappearance, they would have found proof that Dellen Millard killed Laura. That meant that both his father Wayne and Tim Bosma would still be alive and well. I've read the letter Sean sent to the police, and I can tell you he is absolutely correct in everything he says. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. You can also join my Patreon. Some people give $1, some people give $5, some $10, some $20, but that helps keep the videos coming. We are also in the midst of a fundraiser. This is the thumbnail to the video on my channel that will tell you all about what we are raising money for. We are raising money in hopes of solving some cold cases. All the details are in the video. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're healthy and happy. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.